Football is a beautiful game. It's played with the mind, the soul. But what happens when plan A and plan B fails? You bring in the destroyers, the unstoppable forces, the big men. So in the spirit of putting some weight on over Christmas, let's talk about the art and beauty of the target man. As always, let's define what a target man is. For me, firstly, it's someone who holds up the ball up front. Of course, nowadays you've got Mohamed Salah, Ollie Watkins, all these types of players that work great off the shoulder because they get play through the defence and they're so quick that essentially they are the new poachers in the modern game. But a target man for me is a player whose back is facing the goal normally. Maybe someone who links up the play a bit, but not dropping into a number 10 role, just who are essentially helping other players get up the pitch so they can form the attack. And of course, a target man has to be good in the air. It's not always limited to a tall and a big striker, but it has to be someone who, when plan A fails, you just lump it into the box and pray for the best. And the elite of the elite within the modern era was Didier Drogba. Didier Drogba was the ideal target man for any team. In the 2000s, I guarantee, other than maybe Arsenal, every Premier League team would have killed to have Drogba as their starting number 9. Big game Didier, he always would score in the finals, and it didn't matter if he scored 15 goals in the league. Every time Chelsea needed him, he would always turn up for them. Because just put yourself in a Chelsea fan's shoes, they're standing at the Allianz Arena in 2012 and they're 1-0 down to Bayern Munich. They're going to miss out on the first chance to win a Champions League trophy, and after all else fails against one of the best Bayern Munich squads we've ever seen, Chelsea corner goes into the box and you've got Didier Drogba who scores a bullet header past Manuel Neuer. That is why target was so sought after, because like I say, after all else fails, Didier Drogba comes up in that final and essentially he won Chelsea their first Champions League trophy. It's unfair to speak about Drogba and compare him to other target men because he was a freak athlete as well. Someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, you could argue, is a target man because the amount of headers that he scored in his career, he could jump higher. I think he could jump as high as the average NBA player. Because with Drogba, he was quick, he was strong, he could dribble, he could take on a man, he could get him behind, but he could score headers. He really was the perfect striker. In the 2000s and early 2010s, he was the perfect target man. Do feel with these big men though, just a cannon of a shot is just imperative to have. All remember Drogba's goal against Everton, where he just took it off the half volley and it went straight past Tim Howard. There's no statistical analysis on the best areas to shoot. He just saw a sight of goal and went for it. And that is a great way to transition to maybe my favourite target man ever, and that is Zlatan Ibrahimović. If you wanted a right foot moulded by the Greek gods, you'd ask for one like Zlatan Ibrahimovic's. He had an absolute cannon of a right foot. And to me, again, Zlatan was just more than a lump it into the box player, as we saw in his early days at Ajax and Juventus, and then later on at Inter Milan. He was clearly much more than a stereotypical target man. One of my favourite goals Ibra scored was at Ajax, where he just shallomed through about 4 or 5 players and just buried it in the bottom corner. I mean, apparently he was absolutely obsessed with the Brazilian Ronaldo, that he modelled his entire game on him. And when you combine that, being a black belt in karate, and then you combine that with being 6'5", it made him into one of the most unique players ever to play football. But for me, when I really appreciated Zlatan's brilliance as a target man was when he played for Man United. We all saw him in his prime in Italy, tiny bit of Spain, but he wasn't used properly. But for me, it was when he left PSG, being a dominant goal scorer, and he went to Man United. And you were like, wow, we all thought this player in his late 30s, he wasn't going to be able to adjust to the speed of the Premier League. But he took it by storm, didn't he? In a weird Man United side, he scored 17 goals in just 28 games. He helped them win the League Cup final, and he also helped them win the Europa League final. And I'm sure if you ask a lot of Man United fans, that season is probably one of the last seasons that was fairly enjoyable because they had a decent side. I think it was when his athleticism slowed down is when you really saw his brilliance, because I remember watching his debut against Bournemouth away and he scored that goal from the right hand side corner in the box, and it was just fantastic the way he took it. I honestly was expecting him to be a 8-goal a season striker. His intelligence really helped him later on in his career, and we even saw that when he went to AC Milan in his 40s and helped them win a Scudetto. Of course, in the current modern era, you have some brilliant target men, don't you? I think they are evolving, but Robert Lewandowski is one of the best target men of all time. Harry Kane, again, I think he a bit of a hybrid because he drops back a bit, and I don't think he's ever been dominant in the air, but you'd still call him a quote-unquote target man. Romelu Lukaku, especially at Everton, was absolutely brilliant, but again, he was helped with his athleticism, and I think the way he could dribble and move so nimbly, being 6'5", 15 stone. But we're not here only to discuss the brilliant target men throughout the history of football. We want to discuss those cult heroes who we all loved, but we all know were bloody limited during their day. And if you want to start with a cult hero, or a cult villain in this sense, it's got to be Andy Carroll. Andy Carroll was one of the best headers of the ball in the world during his day, and that sounds so silly, but I'll die on this hill saying Andy Carroll may have been the best header of the ball in the Premier League when he was in his mid-20s. I mean, just to add to Carroll's aura, he turned up to a wedding in his West Ham tracksuit. He got signed in the same transfer window as Luis Suarez and was the marquee signing during that time. He scored one of the best overhead kicks I've ever seen at West Ham. And now he's playing for Bordeaux in the 4th division of French football. He was bought for £35 million by Liverpool when Kenny Dalglish was in charge. So imagine the inflation from around 12 years ago. He'd be worth about 150 million in this market. He wasn't worth 35 million back then. It was a complete panic buy because he had a few promising seasons at Newcastle. And it was unfortunate because the lad had ability, but going to Liverpool at that time, there was an aching just to be competitive again, because post Rafa Benitez, they had a few dodgy years with Roy Hodgson and Kenny Dalglish, at least domestically. So when you buy Andy Carroll for 35 million, plus in the same window you buy a Stuart Downing for 20 plus million, and at the time a Jordan Henderson for around 20 million, the hope and the expectations were just so low for those signings, and that's unfortunate because Andy Carroll in another world would have been a 15 goal a season striker. He could have been someone like Chris Wood at Nottingham Forest at the moment. But I tell you what, if there are any Liverpool fans out there, you will remember that goal he scored at Wembley in the semi-final against Everton to get to the FA Cup final. But let's continue this route of going down the cult heroes, and a name that people forget but was a huge striker at the time was Emile Heskey. For me, being 26, I grew up with Emile Heskey being a bit of an old player, but then getting relentlessly mocked online by KSI in his FIFA videos. That is all our generation really knows of Emile Heskey. Essentially just being a bit of a joke, which was brilliant at the time, but you also go, he was a good player in his day. Him and Michael Owen formed a brilliant big man, little man partnership, and it helped Michael Owen win the Ballon d'Or. And that's a good point because big man, little man partnerships, they were brilliant during their time. One of my favourite was Edin Dzeko's and Sergio Aguero's. Sergio Aguero always gets the plaudits and the highlights from his time at Man City, and rightly so because he's one of the best strikers we're ever going to see. But we need to remember Edin Dzeko and his influence on that Man City team, and especially the first one that won the title. It's always funny because Sergio Aguero, and again rightly so, gets the highlights of that QPR game when they won the title. But let's not forget, Edin Dzeko scored the equaliser about 2 minutes prior to that. Another big man, little man partnership that was great was Jermaine Defoe and Peter Crouch. And Peter Crouch was one of the most interesting target men out there, just because of his sheer height. I mean, the guy was 6'7" and he was very lanky, which allowed him to get the most headed goals in Premier League history. But again, the thing was with Peter Crouch, which it maybe created the phrase of good feet for a big man, because he did have fairly good feet, not compared to nowadays at all. He was able to score many overhead kicks, and he was a great player, but one of the most frustrating but most talented target men you're ever going to see. It was Olivier Giroud. When I sit down with my kids in the future and I show them Olivier Giroud highlights, I mean, I never thought I'd say that word, but they're going to ask how many Ballon d'Ors did he win, just because of the sheer brilliance of all of his goals. But we remember in the real time, he was so frustrating to watch, wasn't he? Came from Montpellier, had a great career there, got a big move to Arsenal, and I'm sure Arsenal fans during the kind of Wenger, the banter era, he was so frustrating because in one game he'd be scoring scorpion kicks, he'd be doing the little flicks to Jack Wilshere when they played Norwich. But on the other hand, then he'd have another 9 games where he wouldn't touch the ball. He was so lazy at times. And I think with Giroud, he probably came to his own at the end of the Wenger era, where they didn't really have an out-and-out striker. And then he moved to Chelsea, had a pretty good career there if you ask me, helped France win the World Cup, and then he moved to AC Milan, and now he's in America. And he probably got better with age really, because he was never the quickest, he was quite lazy at times, and I think his intelligence just caught up to him. But there's loads, isn't there? You can never forget about Miroslav Klose, especially at Werder Bremen, and especially for the German national team. Mario Mandzukic, he was brilliant when he played for Bayern Munich. Even Mario Gomez prior to him. I think the German league had some great targets, because naturally I think most of the German players just quite big and strong, weren't they? But I suppose it takes us on today, because what's happened to the big target man? Do they exist anymore? I'd say yes, but they've just evolved, haven't they? And you can do so many videos on how strikers are evolving. And I have done, and I'll continue to do so, because it's a thing that's happening within football. Naturally, the game's getting quicker, and having a 4-4-2 formation where you just lump balls into the box, it doesn't work anymore. We see there's one team really that's doing that in the Premier League currently, and that's Everton, and they have no idea how to score the ball. Having Dwight McNeil and Dye just trying to whip balls into Beto and Calvert-Lewin, it's never going to work, because that's not how football is played today. And I also think because keepers are playing out from the back a lot more, like an Alisson or an Edison, an Nana, maybe, I don't really know. There's no need for you to have a Kevin Davies, who, like I say, can bring JJ Okocha and Chris Eagles into play, because most of the attacks are started from the keeper and just they play it out. But then again, if we look at the top scorers in the Premier League at the moment, you look in other than Mohamed Salah, but you're looking at players like Haaland and Alexander Isak, and they probably are the best strikers in the Premier League. But obviously, they aren't unathletic. Erling Haaland is as quick as any player in the league. He can jump higher than any player in the league. He can do similar athletic tricks to Ibrahimović, like we saw against Borussia Dortmund. And then with Alexander Isak, I mean, every team would want him at the moment. He plays like a winger, he's as quick as a winger, he's quite slim, but he's strong and he's tall and he's good in the air. He's literally everything you want in a striker. So they still do exist, it's just teams are playing differently, and therefore strikers have had to adapt to that. Yes, back in the day there was a bit of a humbleness to the target men, because it wasn't about statistical analysis, they just lump it in the box and let Didier Drogba go to work, wouldn't they? But we also have to remember that it used to be very boring sometimes, just watching these strikers go for a ball in the box and miss 9 out of 10 headers. But that is why there's such an art and a beauty to these target men. When all else fails, just hit it in, close your eyes, and just hope Didier Drogba scores that goal he did against Bayern Munich. They may be decreasing in their stereotypical sense, but they will never go away. Let me know what you think of target men. Let me know who you think the best current target men are. But leave a comment, if you can leave a like, and if you subscribe to the channel, that'd be brilliant. But thanks for watching.